He didn't expect anyone else at her grave. The morning was quiet, the cemetery glowing in autumn gold. For 3 years, he'd come here alone, until today. A little girl, no more than 8, sat beside the headstone, shivering in a thin coat. When he asked what she was doing, her answer hit harder than grief ever had. "I came to see my mom." Mama Ivy. What if everything you thought you knew about the person you loved was only half the story? Keep reading. The truth is just beginning to rise from the silence. Maple Hill Cemetery lay still beneath the golden hush of autumn. Trees dressed in copper and gold swayed gently above, their leaves falling like soft-spoken memories. The chill of October carried the scent of dried earth and dying leaves, wrapping Hudson Valley in a beauty too serene, too cruel, Knox Wilder thought, for a place built on sorrow. A black Cadillac glided into the narrow lot, its paint catching what little sunlight filtered through the trees. The door opened with a soft, deliberate click. Knox Wilder stepped out. He was 32, tall and sharply dressed, the kind of man whose presence drew attention even in silence. His suit was navy wool, custom-fitted, hand-stitched in Italy. A platinum watch peeked out from beneath his sleeve as he adjusted the cuff of his shirt with practiced elegance, every movement polished, automatic. But it was his eyes that gave him away. Behind the designer sunglasses were sleepless nights, and behind that, grief, raw, unyielding, unspoken. Knox Wilder, tech billionaire and CEO of Wilder Tech Dynamics, often called Wall Street's golden cipher, walked not as a man of power today, but as a man hollowed out by loss. Each step toward the grave was deliberate, as if his body moved forward while his soul stayed behind. Leaves cracked beneath his polished shoes, but he didn't look down. He had walked this path every year, on this exact day. 3 years ago, Ivy Wilder, his wife, his wild flame, his quiet compass, had died. The white marble gravestone stood at the center of a small clearing, framed by fading chrysanthemums. Time had touched everything around it, but not this stone. It looked as untouched as the moment they buried her. Ivy Wilder. 1989-2022. Loved fiercely. Lost too soon. Knox lowered himself to one knee, placing a bouquet of white lilies against the base. He stared at the name, no longer just etched in stone, but carved into every part of who he was. 3 years, Ivy, he murmured. 3 years, and I still don't know how to breathe without you. He reached out, fingertips grazing the cold marble, as if hoping it would speak back. The wind stirred through the trees like an invisible hand brushing past his shoulder. I thought time would numb it. That I'd wake up one day and not expect you to be there, walking barefoot through the kitchen, laughing at something stupid I said. But here I am. His voice caught. Still checking the closet. Still setting your side of the bed cold. His jaw clenched as he looked down. The man who had conquered markets, silenced competitors, and negotiated billion-dollar deals, was unraveling in front of a piece of stone. I was so busy building an empire, I didn't see you slipping away. God, I should have seen it. I should have been there. Should have. He stopped himself, shaking his head. I'm sorry. And then he sat, on the cool, damp grass, letting silence wrap around him like punishment. For all the wealth he had gained, all the power he held, Knox Wilder had never felt poorer than he did right now. What was success, if the one person he built it for was no longer there to see it? Knox sat in silence, the cool earth beneath him doing nothing to numb the weight pressing on his chest. Just as he leaned forward to brush a fallen leaf off the gravestone, a small sound pricked at his awareness, a soft sniffle, barely audible through the rustling trees. He froze. Slowly, he turned his head. Just a few feet to the left, half shielded by a tall bush and the angle of Ivy's headstone, was a little girl. She was curled up tight, arms wrapped around her knees, a threadbare coat doing little to guard her from the sharp autumn chill. Her shoes were scuffed, socks damp with dew. Long strands of dark hair clung to her cheeks, and her breath came in shallow, shaky bursts. She looked lost and impossibly small. Knox's brows knit together. He stood, brushing off his pants, and took a cautious step closer. "Hey there," he said softly, crouching to her level. "You okay? Are you lost?" The girl looked up slowly. And in that instant, something shifted. Her eyes, big, brown, and glassy with tears, met his. There was no fear, no hesitation, just a quiet, aching sadness that reached straight through him. "No, sir," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm here to see my mom." Knox blinked, uncertain he'd heard her right. He looked around, scanning the nearby graves, wondering if she'd wandered from another plot. "Your mom," he echoed gently. "What's her name?" The girl turned her head slightly, eyes drifting back to the marble stone he had just been kneeling in front of. She lifted a small hand and pointed, the tip of her finger trembling slightly. "Mama Ivy." Knox didn't breathe. His brain scrambled for logic, for a timeline, for a rational explanation, but nothing came. The air grew thick, heavy, like the moment before an earthquake. "What did you say?" he asked, voice low, tight. The girl looked up at him again, eyes shining with sincerity. "She was my mama." And just like that, the ground beneath Knox Wilder's perfectly constructed world cracked open. The woman he had loved, mourned, and believed he'd known better than anyone, had left behind a secret big enough to shake the very foundation of his grief. The words Mama Ivy kept looping in Knox's head like a broken record. He barely remembered how he got the girl into his car, only that her name was Emily Grace, and she was cold, hungry, and heartbreakingly calm for someone so young. She sat in the passenger seat now, legs dangling, fingers curled tightly around a faded pink backpack. She hadn't said much during the ride, only gave him an address when he gently asked where she lived. "Willow Creek Children's Home," she had whispered. "It's in Brooklyn." Knox gripped the steering wheel tighter, as he pulled into the narrow drive of the old brownstone building. The sign above the door was simple, but worn, "Willow Creek Children's Home since 1972. The building had seen better days, but it was clean. Respectable. Still, it made something uneasy twist in his stomach. They stepped inside, the warm air carrying the scent of oatmeal and pencil shavings. Laughter echoed faintly from down the hall, children's voices, innocent and bright. Knox's presence, though, immediately silenced the front lobby. His tailored suit, his towering height, the storm brewing in his eyes. He didn't belong here. An older woman with silver-streaked hair and gentle eyes appeared in the doorway, a clipboard in one hand. "Emily," she said, her voice warm but cautious, "why don't you go join the others in the art room, sweetie?" Emily looked up at Knox for a long moment, then nodded silently and walked away, her small shoulders disappearing around the corner. The woman turned back to him. "You must be Mr. Wilder," she said, folding her hands calmly. "I'm Caroline Brooks, director here." Knox's jaw tightened. He followed her into a small office lined with children's drawings and old books. The second the door shut, the air changed. He placed both hands firmly on the edge of her desk, leaning forward. His voice was low, controlled, but lethal. "Tell me the truth, Mrs. Brooks. When did Ivy have a child? And why the hell didn't I know about it?" Mrs. Brooks didn't flinch. Her eyes met his with the quiet patience of someone who'd already lived this moment in her head. She took a slow breath, then exhaled. "Emily isn't Ivy's biological daughter, Mr. Wilder." She paused, then added, "But to that little girl, Ivy was everything." Knox blinked, confusion clouding the storm of anger in his chest. "What do you mean she's not hers?" Emily said. "I know what Emily said," Mrs. Brooks interrupted gently. "Because that's what Ivy was to her. A mother. The only real one she's ever known." The words hung heavy in the room. Knox slowly straightened, his brows knitting as the meaning began to take root, but he didn't want to believe it. "Couldn't. Ivy never told me. Not once." "I don't doubt that," Mrs. Brooks replied. "She didn't do it for credit. She didn't do it for recognition. She did it because she loved these kids. Especially Emily." Knox turned away for a second, staring at a crayon drawing of a rainbow taped to the wall. 100 questions formed in his mind, none of them with answers he was ready to face. "She was sending money, wasn't she?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Brooks nodded. "Every month. Like clockwork. Long before she married you. And even after. We didn't know her real name at first, she only signed the checks R.E., but when I met her, I knew. She was the real thing." Knox closed his eyes. He had known Ivy to be kind. Passionate. Soft in all the ways he wasn't. But this was a part of her he had never seen, never been allowed to see. And somehow, that hurt more than anything. Mrs. Brooks stood in silence for a moment, then turned toward the tall metal cabinet behind her desk. She unlocked it with a small silver key, and pulled the doors open with a soft creak. From inside, she withdrew a folder, worn, thick, and clearly used more than once. She laid it gently on the desk between them and opened it. Inside were dozens of printed receipts, handwritten notes, and scanned bank transfers. Knox leaned in, his eyes darting over the names, the dates. Ivy Wilder, every month like clockwork. Some transfers went back nearly 6 years. The amounts went astronomical, but consistent. Faithful. Mrs. Brooks tapped a stack of them. "She supported the children here using her own salary," she said quietly. "She never missed a month. Not once." Knox stared at the documents, his throat dry. His mind flashed back to Ivy carefully budgeting groceries, brushing off shopping trips, always saying she didn't need anything new. He clenched his fists slowly, pressing them against the edge of the desk. "How long?" he asked, voice barely restrained. "How long was she doing this?" "Since before she met you," Mrs. Brooks replied. "And after you got married," she kept going. Quietly. She never let it stop. Knox swallowed hard. Guilt gnawed at him like acid. She used to skip dinners with clients, just to catch up on reading. "I thought she just needed space. I didn't realize. She never spent a cent on herself," Mrs. Brooks added. Her voice cracked, eyes beginning to glisten. "Not a new dress, not a night out. But every winter, boxes of coats and boots arrived for the kids. Every school year, new backpacks, new books." Knox backed away a step, running a hand through his hair. He thought of the late nights he spent in meetings, the lavish events, the luxury cars he'd cycled through, all while Ivy quietly poured her life into children he never knew existed. While he was chasing wealth, she was giving hers away. Then, a darker question surfaced. One he hadn't wanted to face. He turned back to Mrs. Brooks, voice low, rough. "Is that why she didn't tell me she was sick?" Mrs. Brooks looked down. Her silence said more than any answer. Knox's heart pounded in his chest. She kept saying it was just fatigue. Headaches. "I told her to see a doctor. She always said it could wait." Mrs. Brooks nodded slowly, her voice soft as ash. "She didn't want to waste money on herself. She said if she got treatment, she wouldn't be able to help the children anymore." Knox stared at her, stunned. Rage, sorrow, and shame twisted inside him until he didn't know which one to feel first. So she let herself die. To keep giving. Mrs. Brooks wiped at the corner of her eye, then nodded again. She gave everything she had, Mr. Wilder. Even her life. The highway stretched out endlessly before him, but Knox barely saw it. His hands gripped the steering wheel like a man clinging to the edge of a cliff, knuckles bone white, veins taut with unspoken panic. His jaw clenched so tight, he could feel the pulse throbbing at his temple. Horns blared around him. Someone yelled. The city moved at its usual frantic pace. But inside the car, time had fractured. The world outside was irrelevant now. All he could hear was her voice, faint, ghost-like, tucked somewhere in the corner of his mind. And Mrs. Brooks' words echoing through the silence. She gave everything she had, Mr. Wilder. Even her life. He blinked hard, vision blurring as the weight of the truth began to suffocate him. He hadn't cried in years. Not at the funeral. Not during the eulogy. Not even when the house fell silent after she was gone. But now, something inside him was cracking. Jesus Christ, he muttered, swerving into a shoulder lane and slamming the brakes. The car jolted to a halt. Knox dropped his forehead onto the steering wheel, breathing hard, like he'd just run a marathon he didn't remember starting. "What did I do to her?" he whispered. "How the hell did I let her carry all of that? Alone?" His breath hitched. His chest felt like it might cave in. He could see her face now, Ivy, standing barefoot in their kitchen, humming some old Motown song as she stirred soup. The soft way she'd look at him when he walked through the door. The nights she said she was just tired and kissed him goodnight with a little too much weight in her eyes. He missed it. All of it. And the realization hit him like a fist to the ribs. He hadn't just missed her illness. He had missed her. Her whole world. Her quiet battles. Her secret sacrifices. Every time, she had smiled through the pain. Every night, she had chosen silence over complaint, so she wouldn't burden him. He slammed his fist into the steering wheel. Damn it. The sound bounced off the windshield, but it didn't help. Nothing could. By the time he pulled into the townhouse, the sky had already turned black. The building loomed quietly, same as always, elegant, sterile, empty. Knox walked in like a man walking into a museum of his own failures. The air was cold. Still. Every inch of the house was perfect, untouched. Her books were still lined up in alphabetical order. The orchid she used to water every Sunday had withered, its petals dry and crumbling. Her mug, the one that said "strong like my coffee," sat exactly where she'd left it 3 years ago. He walked to the mantel, and there it was, the wedding photo. Ivy's eyes sparkled, her head tilted slightly toward his shoulder, a wide, unguarded grin on her lips. He remembered how nervous she'd been that day. How many times she'd asked if she looked too plain. How she'd whispered to him, "I don't need the whole world watching. I just need you." His fingers trembled as he touched the glass. "You were trying to save the world," he said, voice thick. "And I didn't even bother to ask where you kept disappearing to." He turned slowly, eyes scanning the house, their house. The dining room she never hosted dinners in. The couch she always curled up on with a notebook full of scribbles he never asked to read. The spare bedroom she claimed was for guests, but where she sometimes sat for hours when she couldn't sleep. "You were saving them, Ivy. And I was too damn busy saving a stock portfolio." He laughed then, but it was hollow, broken. He sank onto the couch and buried his face in his hands. And for the first time since the funeral, he let himself fall apart. "You were carrying so much. A whole world. 100 little lives. His voice cracked. And I didn't see any of it. I didn't even ask. The silence answered him, like it always did. But this time, it wasn't peace. It was punishment. He thought of Emily. Her small voice. Her fragile hands. The way she had said, "Mama Ivy," without hesitation, without doubt. He had spent 3 years grieving Ivy. But now he was mourning everything she never got to say. The morning air was damp, clinging to Knox's skin, as he stood at the entrance of Willow Creek Children's Home. The world looked muted under the grey sky, as if it, too, was still grieving. This time, he didn't walk in like a CEO. No suit. No tie. No title. Just a man, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers in one hand, and a question that weighed heavier than anything he'd ever signed in ink. The receptionist looked up, surprised to see him again so soon. Mrs. Brooks stepped out of her office, and the moment their eyes met, she seemed to understand. She gave a small, almost relieved smile. "She's in the courtyard," she said gently. "Been out there since breakfast." Knox nodded silently. The courtyard was quiet. Leaves danced along the stone paths. And there she was, Emily, sitting on the same bench beneath the old maple tree, her legs swinging off the edge, a worn chapter book cradled in her hands. She was staring down at it, but her eyes weren't moving. She wasn't reading. She was waiting. He walked toward her slowly. "Hey." She looked up, startled, then blinked, unsure if she was imagining him. "You came back," she said softly. "Of course I did." "People don't usually come back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That broke something in him. He sat down beside her, close, but not too close. She glanced at the flowers in his hand. "Those aren't lilies," she said. "No," Knox smiled faintly. Ivy used to say sunflowers were her secret favorite. She said they were loud and messy and too bright, like they didn't care what people thought. "Just like you." Emily smiled, just a flicker. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Knox turned to her, his voice steady but quiet. "Emily, I wanted to ask you something. Something important." She looked up at him, eyes wide and still unsure. "Would you?" He hesitated. Not because he didn't know what he wanted to say, but because he wanted to get it right. "Would you want to come live with me?" Emily blinked. Her small fingers clutched the book tighter. "Live with you?" "Yeah," he nodded. "If that's something you'd want." "I mean, I know this might be sudden, and we can take time. But I'm not really hers," Emily blurted. "I mean, not by blood. I don't know if I'm allowed to go with you." Knox looked her in the eye, voice firm, but full of warmth. "Blood doesn't make someone your family. Ivy didn't love you because she had to. She chose to. And if you let me, I'd like to do the same." Emily swallowed hard. Her voice trembled. "Do you think she'd want that?" "I know she would," he said, placing the bouquet beside her. "She spent her whole life taking care of others. She loved you, Emily. Fiercely. And I think I'm supposed to keep that going." Emily looked down at her lap, silent. "But I cry at night sometimes," she said suddenly, her voice cracking. "And I don't always know why. And I'm scared I'll mess up, or do something bad, and then you'll leave too." Knox's heart twisted. He reached over, slowly, gently, and rested a hand over hers. "Hey. I cry at night too," he said quietly. "I mess up. I get scared. But I'm not going anywhere. Not now. Not ever." She looked at him, really looked at him this time, and for the first time, the fear in her eyes began to fade. "Okay," she whispered. "Can we bring some of my books?" Knox let out a small, choked laugh. "We'll bring all of them. Even the boring ones. Especially the boring ones." Emily finally smiled, full and real. Knox stood and offered his hand. She hesitated, just a second, then reached up and slipped her small fingers into his. As they walked back inside together, hand in hand, something shifted in the air. Not just a decision made, but a promise kept. Snow fell in soft, steady waves outside the tall windows of Knox's townhouse. It was early, too early for the city to stir, but inside, everything was quiet and warm. The living room was gently lit by the pale grey light of winter morning, casting long shadows over the couch, the bookshelves, the tiny paper snowflakes taped crookedly to the glass. Emily stood at the window, forehead pressed lightly to the pane, her breath forming delicate clouds on the glass. She was wearing a red sweater that Ivy had bought her once, back when she was just a stranger in a home full of forgotten children. Now it was hers. Now this home was hers. Knox stood a few feet behind her, a mug of cocoa in his hands, watching the moment unfold. It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud. But it was everything. Emily turned toward him slowly, her brown eyes bright, cheeks pink from the cold against the window. "You know," she said, with a quiet smile, "I think Mama Ivy would be really happy if she saw you now." Knox didn't answer. He didn't need to. Instead, he walked over, gently placed a hand on the top of her head, and gave her hair a soft, affectionate tousle. She leaned into it, just a little, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. It was no longer about loss. No longer about the pain, or the questions, or what ifs. It was about now. About love. About her. And in that moment, Knox felt something he hadn't in years. Whole. Later that day, he found himself sitting by the fireplace, Emily curled up beside him with her book and a blanket that smelled faintly of cinnamon and home. He looked down at her, at how naturally she fit into the silence, no longer a stranger. No longer a gap in his life, but the bridge that mended it. His eyes drifted toward the mantel. Ivy's photo was still there. But today, it didn't ache to look at it. Today, it felt like she was here. Watching. Smiling. He thought of all the things he'd once believed mattered, stock prices, mergers, speaking engagements. And then he looked at Emily. At her small hands holding a book too big for her lap. At the faint smudge of cocoa on her cheek. At the soft rhythm of her breath, as she began to doze off. And he finally understood. Life isn't about million-dollar contracts, he murmured to the quiet room, but about the people we love. Outside, the snow kept falling. And inside, the cold heart of a man who once thought he had lost everything was quietly, slowly, beating again. Outside, the snow continued to fall in soft, steady silence. Inside the house, two souls, once lost, once broken, were finding their way back to warmth, to meaning, to each other. There were no grand declarations. No perfect endings. Just a man, a child, and the quiet power of love that refused to die. Because sometimes, love doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to demand. It just gives. Quietly. Fiercely. Completely. Even after death. And in that giving, it leaves behind something far greater than memory. It leaves behind rebirth. True love isn't found in what we keep for ourselves, but in what we quietly sacrifice for others. Even when someone is gone, the love they left behind can still bring a frozen heart back to life.